This election cycle in Australia is shaping up to be an uninspiring spendathon. But buried in the campaign over the weekend was an interesting bit of bipartisanship, which I think will prove to be of considerable long term significance. The Liberal Party have backflipped on the Port of Darwin lease to a Chinese company called Landbridge. It was the Liberal Party under Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull who allowed the deal to go through. And he did that just a few months after he took over from Tony Abbott after stabbing him in the back in a messy leadership spill in 2015. And whilst it's true that the deal, the lease between the Northern Territory and the Chinese company, was done at that territory level, directly with the Northern Territory government, it is a fact that Malcolm Turnbull could have blocked it if he wanted to, but he chose not to. Fast forward 10 years, an opposition leader and head of today's Liberal Party, Peter Dutton, tried to spring a surprise attack on Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, planning to announce that if elected, he would use the Commonwealth compulsory acquisition powers to put control of the port back into Australian hands. But it seems that Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, got wind of the plan and launched a preemptive attack, going onto radio in Darwin to announce that he would do exactly the same thing. This sudden bipartisanship on the issue of Chinese ownership of Australian assets marks one of the few distinctive features of an otherwise utterly uninspiring election season. And against the backdrop of rapidly accelerating trade tensions and China's recent live firing exercises in between Australia and New Zealand, this might be the one issue coming out of this election that actually matters long term. My name's Topher this is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to make sense of the world as it goes mad around us. And election campaigns are maddening at the best of times, and this one has been a particularly infuriating one. It's an uninspiring spendathon, like I said, and in a way, this promise to buy back the Port of Darwin is, yes, just another big spendathon that we can't afford. But it's not the money side that makes this promise interesting, it's the geopolitics and the timing. Let's not forget that the Liberal Party allowed this deal to go through in 2015, and then, as recently as 2022, the then Prime Minister Scott Morrison, Liberal, claimed that the federal government didn't have the power in 2015 to override the deal in any case. It was a classic political "don't look at us." The thing is, whilst it's technically true that the deal probably fell outside of the jurisdiction of the Foreign Investment Review Board, for technical reasons I won't go into, the fact is that the federal government could have stopped it 10 different ways if it wanted to. A simple phone call to the Northern Territory Chief Minister to let them know that we'll be reviewing your allocation of GST in light of your leasing of assets to foreign powers. Well, that would probably be enough to stop the deal in its tracks. Then there's a raft of legislative options as well. No, the deal went through without opposition from the Liberal government of the time because they were happy for it to go through. It was a $500 million deal to lease the port to Landbridge for 99 years, Landbridge being the Australian subsidiary of a Chinese company owned by Yi Cheng, who's a Chinese billionaire with deep ties to the CCP. Now, if you think that Elon Musk's relationship with the US government is a little too cozy, you should see how cozy billionaires have to get with the Chinese Communist Party. For them, it's a matter of survival, as the re-education of Jack Ma, the billionaire owner of Alibaba, who, well, he got a little too controversial, and suddenly he had a change of heart, and now he lives a quiet life of contemplation out of the public eye, enjoying his new hobby of painting. Because that was his own choice, of his own free will, of course. So, leasing the Port of Darwin to a Chinese billionaire is synonymous with leasing the Port of Darwin to the Chinese Communist Party. And whilst I am all for foreign investment and the free movement of trade and capital all over the world, let's not be naive. The Chinese Communist Party don't invest for financial reasons, they invest for influence. And we know that because that is the entire premise of the Belt and Road Initiative, where China has been investing in infrastructure and assets all over the world, from mines and power grids in Africa to ports in the South Pacific and, yes, indeed, in Australia. The Chinese have been on a spending spree for the last few decades. Why? Well, officially, they're investing in the supply chain needed so that they can maintain their manufacturing advantage. They've secured reserves of cobalt and rare earth minerals, as well as energy resources and the like, so that they can continue to emerge and take their place near, or indeed at, the very top of the global rankings. And there's nothing wrong with that ambition as far as it goes. But China is not like Australia or the US or even Europe for that matter. Everything China does is for China. Not the Chinese people, but the Chinese government. And the Belt and Road Initiative is no exception. They weren't just buying infrastructure. They were buying friends and buying leverage. If there's something the CCP understands well, it's the concept of leverage over time. We saw that play out in their retaking of Hong Kong prior to the end of the agreed 99-year lease with the United Kingdom. Sound familiar? They applied leverage over time onto the UK and they got what they wanted, which was they got Hong Kong back off the British government early. Once the CCP gets leverage into these smaller countries, or indeed into the Panama Canal or into large parts of Africa, they begin to use that leverage to pressure these countries over time. Now, all's fair in love and war. Let's not pretend that the US and allied powers don't do the same thing. In fact, there's a strong argument to say that this economic form of leverage is far more moral than the CIA style regime change that has been the way with the US for the last 50 odd years. I'm not suggesting that China are alone in this sort of behavior, nor am I suggesting that they're actually evil for doing it. Of course, they're using everything at their disposal to continue to improve their own position on the global stage. They're not unique, they're not evil, but don't pretend that they're not trying to do it to us as well. I do find myself wondering what the conversations were back in Beijing when word reached them that Australia was actually going to sign a 99-year lease for the strategically significant port of Darwin. Can you imagine Australia or the US ever being allowed to lease a strategic asset on mainland China? They must have thought we were mad. And to be honest, they were right. It is madness to hand control of a major strategic asset to the Australian subsidiary of your largest geopolitical rival, even during peaceful times. Now, there is an element of fear-mongering that I do need to rebut here regarding this lease of the Port of Darwin so that I can't be accused of deceiving anyone. The Port of Darwin itself, the one that was leased, is not itself a military asset. And it's not going to be used by China as some sort of a military base. That's absurd fear-mongering. The Chinese having control over a port that is used by civilian ships is a very different thing to them resupplying their naval vessels in an Australian port. But the Port of Darwin is right next to where US naval ships do resupply, and they regularly rotate their military, particularly their Marines, through this port as part of exercises with Australian forces. So it can be said that having assets in this port is an opportunity for the CCP to position human intelligence assets into a strategically significant port for the purpose of observing the training and operational activities of both the US and Australian navies. Well, human intelligence, eyes on the ground, that's not such a big deal, is it? I mean, it's not life or death. But then again, no single intelligence asset ever is. Intelligence gathering is about getting lots of little bits of information and putting it together. And yes, it's true that the Chinese operating the Port of Darwin is not some existential threat to challenge Australia's national security. But nevertheless, despite the fact that you could argue that it's just a commercial deal, now, like I said, I'm not convinced, but regardless, all of a sudden both the Liberal and Labor parties have decided that this is no longer an acceptable state of affairs. Having leased it only 10 years ago, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party in agreement have decided that it's time to take the port back into Australian hands. Now, of course, at this point, it is just an election promise, and we know how election promises usually go. It'll get kicked down the road and into the never never and be forgotten. Except that in this case, the US are likely to push whoever wins the election to actually follow through. See, in 2015, the then US President Barack Obama was not impressed with this deal going through, and he very diplomatically told us that he would like a heads up next time, which is code for why the hell didn't you talk to us about this first? But now with Trump 2.0 large and in charge and pushing places like Panama to end the Chinese ownership of the ports over there, along with the eruption of a wider global trade war, the next Australian Prime Minister might find that they actually have to make good on this promise, whether they like it or not. And that could get tricky because under Australia's compulsory acquisition laws, they have to pay a fair price for the thing that they are seizing. In this case, they're seizing the remaining 89 years of the lease, and that is worth a lot of money. Given they paid $500 million for the 99 years to begin with, but lest you think we should just give them back their $500 million and be done with it, sorry, it's going to be a lot more expensive than that. Historical precedents in similar cases in the past would suggest that Australian taxpayers are not just on the hook for the value of that lease that they paid to us in the first place, but we're also on the hook for their lost profits. All of the profits that they would have made from operating that port for the next 89 years. And that, my friends, is a lot of money. So the Australian government is going to find themselves squeezed by the US on one side wanting us to follow through and get China out of mainland Australia and certainly away from their US Marines when they rotate through here. But on the other side, Australian taxpayers are not going to be wanting to be slugged with what will probably be a multi-billion-dollar bill to the Chinese during a cost of living crisis at a time when the government is already going into absurd and unsustainable levels of debt. They're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. They are going to be caught between domestic politics and geopolitics at a time of increased global tensions. And what seemed like a really clever political ploy during an election campaign is going to turn sour in their mouths should they actually have to follow through on it. And on the other side of this mess that they've created, we will emerge as an Australia which is either more subservient to China than ever before because we failed to end this contract. We're unable to extract ourselves from a simple port lease. Or we will emerge as an Australia which is more beholden to the US than ever before because we will most probably have damaged our trading relationship with China. And this issue might accelerate China's move away from Australian minerals and create some far bigger headaches down the road. This Belt and Road backflip may prove to be the most consequential feature of this otherwise uninspiring election campaign, and I don't think that either Dutton or Albanese will be looking forward to having to clean up this mess later this year. My name's Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to make sense of the world as it changes around us. You can support my work by buying my books and my merch from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Follow me on all the socials via @Topher Field. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. YouTube thinks that you would like this video, and as always, stay free.